Hello, for Unit 3, I'm going to do two brief videos. This first one will be a little bit of an introduction to the reading and to some of the key concepts that I want you to pay attention to as you dive into that. And then I'll do a second video that talks a little bit more about the work that goes with the unit. So for Unit 3, asking you to read Chapter 4, which really still is some of the fundamentals around what's the difference between quantitative and qualitative research, and how do you start to set a purpose, and then how do you start to write research questions and or a hypothesis depending on the type of study that you'll do. And then also looking at qualitative data more in depth, and then in Chapter 8, analyzing and interpreting qualitative data. And the big thing that you'll need to start doing, and I think some of you are already in this process, is really thinking about what is it that you would like to study for your research project. And that work, like I said, we will spend most of our time on March 3rd around that. So I'll be asking you to do some pre-thinking, pre-writing around the topic. Really wanting to think about a project that's meaningful to you, that connects to your professional goals, and that ultimately is about student outcomes. So I just reminded you here of some of the earlier blogs and Twitter handles that you might start to consult. What are the things that you find yourself reading? What are you drawn to? Those often are really good indicators that that's a topic of interest for you. So for Unit 3, like I said, the 3 chapters to read in the Creswell text. In Chapter 4, the things that I'd really like you to pay attention to are really starting to think about the fact that your research question is the pivot point for deciding which methodology is best. And so getting a sense of how do you find a problem that's that right size of it's big enough that it's going to have meaning and it's going to have value, but it's not so big that it's undoable, and it's not so small that it just won't go beyond the work that you're doing in the project. And so just a reminder here that there's a full spectrum of research methods that are represented that we will talk about. Right now, we've been focusing on these big branches of quantitative and qualitative. In Unit 4, you'll get into action research and mixed methods, which is this combined piece. And then down here are kind of the more the specific methods that emerge out of those designs. So you may want to go back to the paper that I gave you in class on February 3rd when we met, just to kind of have that out as you're doing the reading in Chapter 4. Remember, quantitative, the data is the numbers, and the goal is to explain. Shared this with you. Feel free to stop the video and take these down, double check your own understanding. In Chapter 4, the piece that I'd really like you to think about is really this information around variables. When you are doing a quantitative study, you are looking at a relationship between variables. Typically, you've got your dependent and independent variables, but there's also always variables that could be impacting the relationship you seek to explore. So when you're designing a quantitative study, one of the things you need to do is be really specific about how are you going to operationalize the term reading achievement. What does that really mean, for instance? Is that going to be reading achievement as measured by the high school SAT test? Is it going to be reading achievement as measured by a teacher-administered vocabulary test? Is it going to be fluency? Is it going to be a DRA? What are you really talking about when you say reading skills for children? And then what is it that you're going to either manipulate or you're going to explore, and how do those work together? So those are some of the things to pay attention to regarding quantitative in Chapter 4. Qualitative, on the other hand, the data is words. Think, feel, wish, perceive. Those are all keywords. And the goal really is to explore how participants perceive how kind of a complex situation is put together. Again, feel free to stop the video here and double check your understanding of qualitative research. This is some of the work that you would have done prior to our last face-to-face meeting. In chapter 4, one of the things I'd encourage you to focus in around is really thinking about how do you write that research question in qualitative research that gets you at sort of, the Goldilocks problem size, neither too big nor too small. You're looking for that just right piece. And that's, again, something you'll work on in preparation for our next class, and we'll talk more about in class. So how do you decide on the research design? And that is always going to be your research question sets your design. So when you are writing or reading research, you want to look for those keywords that signal what's the question and therefore what's the design. Here's some keywords that are helpful. Again, feel free to sort of stop the video at any point to jot this down. And in your homework, I will ask you to try writing some research questions, so it may be useful to come back to this chart as well. Strong research questions, they make the sample and or the setting clear, they make the methodology clear, specific enough to be accomplished, yet broad enough to have meaning beyond one instance. So here's an example of a weak research question. What do high school girls see as the benefit of participation in a robotics team? That really right now is just too large, and for the scope of the work that we're doing, you're going to want to narrow that more. So typically when you narrow, the questions get longer. So a stronger way to put that might be, what's the correlation of participation in high school robotics and college major selection for girls from small rural high schools? You can see there that I've set up the relationship that I want to look at. You can see a key that it is going to be quantitative methods, and you can see that I've started to delimit the population, girls from small rural high schools. And that is going to make a much more manageable study and a stronger study because I've focused it in there. So here's a question for you. After using interactive social stories, does the frequency of pro-social behavior increase for middle school students with autism? So you want to now be able to start to identify, is this a quantitative or a qualitative study? So some keywords. The word after indicates time, using indicates an intervention, frequency and increase are both words that indicate a numerical relationship, and then the pro-social behavior would be the dependent variable. So indeed, this would be a quantitative study. In a county-wide survey of perception of PBE diplomas, what do special educators identify as challenges for students with moderate and severe disabilities in a PBE system? How do special education administrators in one district reflect on the process to address these challenges? So again, some of those verbs that should and words that should signal various design to you. Survey can be either, so that alone doesn't indicate quantitative or qualitative, but identify, perception, reflect, all of those words do indicate a qualitative design. So hopefully this just starts to frame the content that you'll work with in these 3 chapters, and then I'll make another video that is about the work that you submit in Unit 3.